Yeah, okay. And so here we're still here, 3 hours behind our guests who are joining us online right now. Claire, Yipeng, and Nir, who are with Education for Liberation Collective, and they're all out there in the East Coast, as it were, what we call East Coast anyway. So first of all, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking this time out late in your evening to join us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. It's not often that we get to talk with three strangers, but here we all are, and we're looking forward to it. Just to say that we haven't talked before, but we've been following your work, and that's why we asked you to come on board with us today and give us a sense of the kinds of things that you've been doing, but also about how you all came together, the reasons why you came together for Education for Liberation Collective, and then some of the things that you've been working on. So can I ask, maybe first of all, before we begin the conversation, to start off maybe with Claire, to ask Claire, can you just let listeners know a couple of sentences as to who you are, and then Yipeng, and then Nir, and then if I could start, you can choose, one of you can start and let us know about Education for Liberation Collective.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Claire Nicholson-Hurtig, and I am an educator. I've mostly worked as an adult high school teacher, but I also do designing of courses and workshops. And I'm also a community organizer, and I am also an artist. I'm really into poster art and making political art, as well as growing plants. So, yeah, that's a bit about me.
Awesome. Yipeng?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yipeng. I'm a family doctor, and I've also trained in public health, including studying the settler colonial determinants of health. So how settler colonialism affects people's health, their ability to access health care, and health outcomes overall. I studied that in the context of Turtle Island, so affecting Indigenous people, affecting Indigenous health on so-called Canada or Turtle Island, and also study that in the context of Palestine as well. I've done some work in education as well, in medical school, teaching medical students public health, and happy to be here.
Thank you. And Nir?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nir Hagigi. I am a student at Carleton University. I'm studying international relations with a specialization in global development. I am also the president of the Carleton University chapter of Independent Jewish Voices and the co-president of the Carleton University Human Rights Society. My research deals a lot with Israel and Palestine, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Wow, it's a real pleasure to have such distinguished guests from the East. Thank you so much for taking this time out. As you let listeners know a little bit about yourselves, some light bulbs went on for me. Clearly, I've heard your names around just more than Liberation for Education for Liberation Collective, and I'm really, really thrilled that you've taken this time out. Can one of you start us off and just give us a little bit of information around how this collective in particular came together?
Yeah, for sure. I will just give a quick summary. So, essentially, I have been wanting to sort of share my like facilitation and educational skills in the community for a while, and didn't really was looking for other folks to do that with. And the three of us met through our participation in the local movement for Palestinian liberation here in Ottawa on Unceded Algonquin Anishinaabeg Territory. And we all just sort of realized we had the same, both sort of skill set, but also interests, and like the same political values, where we want to help folks learn about what does collective liberation look like, and what do we need to know to get there. And ultimately, really, I've been an activist for about 20 years now, and I had the benefit when I was coming up to go to a lot of really amazing radical popular education events. I came of age as an activist in Montreal and Toronto, and there were just so many great folks there from whom I learned. Great panels and workshops and conferences, and I wanted to be able to sort of bring some of that analysis and things like that to our local movement. And Yipeng and Mir also were really eager to do that. So that's kind of a general sort of summary. We only formed the collective in like late summer, early fall of last year, so we're pretty new. I don't know if Yipeng or Mir, you want to add anything that I missed there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Yipeng and Mir, like what was it that drew you to work with this particular organization? Because both of you clearly have been very deeply connected and working in various ways.
I mean, I think like we saw like the three of us, and I'm sure many others have seen how like mainstream institutions and organizations, there are limitations with how far they go with political education, especially as it pertains to Palestine, for example. And so we were really interested in creating something new, free of like this kind of institutional overreach and the limitations that some of these mainstream institutions and organizations put in place that silence discussion on critical issues such as Palestine, but knowing that when we create something like it's also like for ourselves to kind of be well or better in these times of overt genocide, at least we can also offer something to the community and the people around us that offer a different lens and view on popular political education that can hopefully move everyone towards collective liberation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
We kind of all joined at the same time, but I wanted to obviously help create a space for community where folks feel empowered to learn from each other and to come to solutions together collectively. Like that's what our collective is about.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think obviously that education is a really powerful tool, but too often it's used to maintain the status quo. So I feel like within our group, we're using education as a way, again, for liberation, and to explore how different systems of oppression are interconnected. And obviously, as was mentioned, we're really focused on intersectionality.
Yeah, that's so good and so important, because quite often we get into these silos, right, where we are organizing with particular communities and there are certain interests, but we don't often see the Venn diagram, how everything is connected. And that's why it's awesome that you guys are working for liberation, both here as well as for elsewhere in the world. And right now, Gaza is on the attention of everyone. Can you guys talk to us a little bit about the ways that you've gone around organizing the things that you've done before we can talk about some of the actual activities that you've done? So are there particular ways that you go around organizing within the community and with others?
I can just say briefly, I guess, I think what's happening right now in the movement is that a lot of people have built up new skills and gotten to know people they didn't know, because, we're more than a year into this current wave of activism for Palestine. And so groups are sort of coming together. And so we just kind of decided to, we found each other, right? And we found our shared values, and we just decided to kind of do our thing, gravitating around that. And we each have different sort of areas of the movement perhaps, where we know folks and we've done work. And so we all kind of have different sort of communities that we sort of connect with.
And you're able to pull together. Yeah,
exactly. And so really, honestly, I would just say we just sort of went for it. We did what we know how to do, which is, we decided on a theme. We contacted some folks if they'd be interested in being speakers, and then we just went for it and planned the first public panel.
And so what have you been doing so far? Tell us about some of the activities you've conducted so far.
I can take this one.
Okay.
So, as was mentioned, like we just recently formed in the fall, and the first thing that we did and we kind of called this like the launch of the collective, which it wasn't a public event. Yes, a soft launch. We were invited by a professor at U Ottawa to give a lecture on anti-Semitism, and so we did that. And we did that on fighting anti-Semitism critically from an anti-Zionist and intersectional perspective. And this was great. We had a full room, and that lecture took a lot of its ideas from the 5 Principles for Dismantling Anti-Semitism, which was a document put out by several different Jewish groups. Claire, if you want to, I think over 15?
18 grassroots Jewish organizations, so not from the mainstream Jewish community, but from the anti-Zionist and anti-war Jewish community around the world.
Yeah, so this included organizations like the United Jewish People's Order in Canada, Independent Jewish Voices, also in Canada, but also the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, among a bunch of different other ones. And the main themes of that lecture was, again, but looking at anti-Semitism through a justice-oriented lens. And we framed it as an anti-Semitism, as hostility or discrimination against Jews as Jews. And our entire lecture was grounded in historical examples, but also in contemporary examples of anti-Semitism as well. Another event that we did, the next event that we did, I should say, was our panel on Canadian complicity in Israeli apartheid. This was on December 4th. And during this panel, we invited 3 speakers. We had a panel of 4 people. Those speakers were Rana Nazal Hamadeh, who is a Palestinian artist and filmmaker, Dan Sawyer from the Punch Up Collective, and Rachel Small from World Beyond War Canada. And this event spoke to a couple of different questions. So we spoke about why Canada chooses to maintain its complicity in Israeli apartheid, what are concrete examples of complicity in the Canadian economy, arts and culture, and beyond, and what are some local strategies and opportunities to join together to collectively challenge this complicity. It was a really great event, and our hope for it was to provide inspiration and to give ideas to challenge this complicity, and to also take action in solidarity with Palestinian liberation movements, especially emphasizing the role of grassroots efforts through the BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign. And from that event, we then released our first resource about, again, why does Canada choose to be complicit in Israeli apartheid, understanding the roots of Canadian complicity. And that resource, I thought, it was really great because it started off with a quote from Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin in 2005, in which he gave a speech to Zionist organizations, in which he said, Israel's values are Canada's values. And that is kind of what our entire event was about, and what this resource is about as well, that Canada's values of colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism are Israel's values, and this is precisely the reason why Canada chooses to be complicit in Israeli apartheid.
So, Nira, I wanted to ask whether or not these resources are available to the public. For example, the notes from the guest lecture on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and the intersectional perspective, and the other analysis on Canada's complicity. Are folks able to get those resources from your Instagram?
So they're able to, the resource that we released just recently about understanding the roots of Canadian complicity in Israel apartheid, that is available through our Instagram, the link in our bio, our link tree. But also the other stuff that you talked about, like the anti-Semitism, we didn't have a specific resource that we ourselves put together, but in our link tree, if you scroll down, you can find a bunch of different resources that we used in our lecture and also provided participants with. So, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add also the way that we're hoping to do our materials is whenever we have an event, right, we produce, it's not just that the information or the discussion is happening just at the event. We want to create things that come out of them that have a longer life and can be shared more broadly. So for the Canadian Simplicity information, we have a comprehensive handout that you can get at our link tree, and then an Instagram post that's sort of a shortened version of that resource. So those are already two things that exist, and we're hoping to make a few more from that event. And in terms of the fighting anti-Semitism from an anti-Zionist, intersectional perspective, we are going to be putting together a resource from that as well. And I will just add that part of the sort of main thrust of that resource is about how anti-Semitism must be fought alongside all other forms of oppression because it is generated by white supremacy. And we need to be in solidarity with all folks who are targeted by white supremacy, which is the opposite of what Zionism is doing, right, which is a form of white supremacy. So I just wanted to add that.
Awesome. Is Instagram the best place for folks to find you guys? Or is there another location?
For the time being.
For the time being. No, it's all good. Just for in case listeners want to follow up, and they just go and search for Education for Liberation Collective. Is that right?
Yeah, it's education.for.liberation.
The number 4.
No, sorry. It's Education for Liberation, FOR, but there's a dot between each word.
Got it. Okay. That'll be easy for folks to check. So talk to us a little bit about the pushbacks or responses that you might have gotten from anywhere as you are going ahead and doing this work. I don't know who to throw this to. Maybe Yipeng?
I mean, I think we've actually had a majority positive response.
Awesome.
I think some of the criticisms that we've gotten are very detailed around certain aspects of how the educational material is presented, but actually, those are really interesting, constructive pieces
Awesome.
to think about as we further strengthen the material that we try to put out there into the world. But in large part, it's been extremely positive with folks really appreciating the political analysis that we're putting out there with the materials. And I think acknowledging that a lot of the knowledge or the awareness is certainly there, but some of the more deeper analysis might not be, and it's just kind of putting people in a room to at least meet and work together to work towards collective actions. So that we all feel a bit closer with one another within the movement, and not so isolated, which is what the existing status quo of society really pits us to experience, to feel disillusioned or despair or powerless, when actually we have a lot of power as people when we build that people power through these kinds of things like collective organizing, but it has to start with a solid political analysis. And I think we're looking forward to thinking about how to have further conversations around things like queer and trans solidarity for Palestine, as well as the opioids crisis, mental health, homelessness. These are some things that we think have been sort of lacking locally, and we know that the work has to start locally from where we are, so simply doing what we can with people that we know and trust. This is how any kind of organizing can take place in this world.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sorry, Claire, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No,
Yes.
No worries. No, I just wanted to add, in addition to what Yipeng is describing, what we've seen, and again, we haven't been around that long, and of course we are not perfect, so of course there's, I'm sure negative things will come up, but honestly we've had an overwhelmingly positive response and interest and excitement about the collective in Ottawa, and I think that just speaks to the fact that there's a lot of new people in the movement, and there must be a gap and a hole, right, that we are filling, which is providing radical political analysis on one end, but also creating space for people to come together, like Yipeng was describing. One of the things that we got the most positive feedback about was that at our first event, it was a panel of speakers, but we had a moment where, the audience had a chance to talk to each other about the theme of the event and talk to each other about why they think that Canada chooses to be complicit. And people really appreciated that opportunity to talk about politics with each other, but with a frame and a structure given to them. Nice. And so it's basically this intersection of building community and talking about the world we live in and how power is functioning. So I just wanted to add that.
No, that's awesome. I also wanted to ask you guys around things that are important to you in the frameworks and how you're going about presenting or structuring these conversations.
I mean, I think one of the things that we talked about early on when we formed the collective is, kind of being in agreement of like how we kind of like work with one another, and how we also resolve conflict. How do we acknowledge when we misstep, and how do we learn from those things? And we kind of talked about something called like a basis of unity, as to how do we operate within this shared space that we consent to being in with one another as we organize together. And I think that kind of thinking we bring to like larger spaces that go beyond just the three of us, where we try to create these events and spaces that try to co-create, I think, the society that we want to see in this world.
Yeah.
So that those kind of values and principles, I think, end up in how we interact with folks in those spaces that we will continuously try to create.
I like that. That's so awesome, because it's so needed when we are organizing within these communities. Especially we've seen in the left, organizing sometimes in the left is very difficult because of a lot of I'll just say it's very difficult. So it's really good to hear. Right? So it's good to hear that you guys are also taking that into account and working with sort of known experiences and histories. Each of you are coming with a lot of experience organizing already. Can you tell us, maybe we can talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the things that we're talking about. So in terms of the connections between, it's really obvious, but maybe we can spend a little bit of time and teasing it apart for folks that are still wrapping their heads around how the Canadian experience of colonization is quite similar, but different to the experiences of colonization of Palestine. How are you drawing out these connections for folks out there in Ottawa?
I can start, and then if either you, Nir, or Yipeng want to add to this, please feel free. I think for us, it's very clear to us. It's been very clear to us from the beginning, right, of the latest onslaught on Gaza, that this is a colonial project, and it just echoes so much of what we have learned about what has happened on the lands that we are on here on Fertile Island, right? And I remember the beginning in October, we had just observed the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And so the fact that there's a lot of people in Canada saying they care about Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination, and then this massive complicity and lots of repression of people speaking out against what Israel is doing and Zionist colonialism, we really want to, as much as we can, highlight the connections between these two experiences of colonialism, right? And so in our resource on this, we point to what Theodore Herzl said about how Israel will be created to be a rampart against the, quote, barbarism of Asia, right? And he uses the word colonial, I think he uses the word, he says an outpost, right? And so really bringing that history to say, look, Canada was founded on the same principles. So that is a reason why Canada as a country now is so invested in supporting Israel. It's not that Israel is telling Canada what to do, it's that Canada is saying it's in our interest. We are also a colonizer, and we want to stand with other colonizers. So that's one way, I would say. I don't know if either of my comrades want to add anything to that.
I think I might just add, like, one of the things that we have tried to kind of like offer the folks that choose to spend their time with us in learning together about these shared struggles for liberation from like capitalism, colonialism, imperialism is like knowing like what actionable collective actions are necessary for decolonizing Canada, moving towards true reconciliation, reparations, restitution for Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, Métis on stolen land, on broken treaty land, on land that the genocide of Indigenous children took place because of the Indian residential school system. And I think reframing a land acknowledgement towards a commitment to decolonizing, and that really involves like not only understanding and acknowledging and committing to collective action towards like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, or the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and those calls to action that came out of that report, many of which, like the majority of which, have like been non-actioned whatsoever by institutions like namely the federal government that is responsible for moving these things forward, but also like understanding like what is our role for like land back for Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, and referencing materials put together by Indigenous scholars, including at Yellowhead Institute, that has generated these kinds of Indigenous policy perspectives, and then also situating things really locally and understanding what fighting for Indigenous sovereignty and environmental rights look like locally. So we referenced Kabolik First Nations legal challenge against a federal nuclear waste facility that is being planned to be built next to the Kitchissippi River, which is the Ottawa River, which is threatening possible contamination with radioactive waste that would last for 15 generations and also destroy a ton of wildlife and habitat for many species. So understanding that the actions of Canada as a settler colonial state here is absolutely wrong, and we need to organize to stop these things from happening and to imagine a whole different world that, you know, does not center profits over people, does not center like land and resource extraction over like collective like environmental well-being, and understand that those same things are happening in Gaza and Palestine because of those same interests that Claire and Nia mentioned.
I can also, hopefully not to sound too repetitive, but we can see that like in both cases there's like a very clear and deliberate effort, in both cases, I mean in Palestine and in Turtle Island, that there's very deliberate efforts to erase these Indigenous identities and connections to the land. And as Yipeng mentioned, Canada's residential schools, enforced relocations, and the similarities to Israel's destruction of Palestinian villages and the renaming of towns, or the, as they call it, the Hebraization of Israel. Militarized control also is another really central aspect of settler colonialism on both in both examples, and we see this with the Canadian state's efforts to suppress, for example, the Wet'suwet'en Indigenous peoples, and in Israel, obviously, we see state violence every single day as well. So both cases, I feel like, are justified through dehumanization that portray Indigenous people as inferior or as a threat. But also we can't forget that both Indigenous peoples, both in Canada but also in Palestine, have demonstrated very immense resilience, and they do continue to resist colonization and to assert their rights to the land, to sovereignty, to self-determination, whatever it might be. They do resist it. So I feel like we see our, I'll stop there actually.
I think that's really wonderful, the way that, this oscillation between what's happening over there and what's happening over here that you guys present. I think that is really beautiful, and I commend you for that. It's certainly something that is needed. It's unfortunate that it takes times like this for this to happen, but what a wonderful vehicle that you guys have been presenting. No, really, kudos. What else can you tell us about what you guys are achieving and wanting to? Anything that you have planned down the road?
I believe one of my comrades is going to talk about that specifically. I just wanted to mention one other small thing.
Sure.
About sort of the genesis of the collective, but also it also informs what we'd like to do down the road, which is essentially, you mentioned before, organizing in the left is hard, right? There can be a lot of conflict and a lot of sort of, I don't know, I would even say intolerance sometimes, right? Folks have a lot of trouble hearing each other and caring about each other. And so one of the sort of inspirations was seeing some of these divides and the lack of solidarity between some different movements and wanting to contribute to changing that, right? And help people understand. These folks of this background, they care about this issue, and it also impacts these other folks over here, but they're not working together. How can we get people to understand all of our equal stake in collective liberation and then work together and be much more powerful in creating that liberation? So, that was like really one of the underlying reasons why we wanted to do this work, and I will hand it to my comrades to talk about kind of stuff we're hoping to do in the future.
Some of the, I guess, so I mentioned earlier, some of the themes that we wanted to explore further, and one of them is queer and trans solidarity for Palestine, and one of the things that happened in Ottawa was the Capitol Pride parade that took place last summer. That organization committed to a number of things, including boycott, divestment, and sanctions, commitment to divestment and boycott from Israeli ties, and many organizations, including hospitals, for example, pulled out of Capitol Pride, basically in solidarity with Israel as it commits genocide. And so I think it brings in a really important question that I think some organizations sometimes do not want to explore, which is why queer and trans solidarity for Palestine exists. And then the other thing that is just so in front of us locally in our community, we had a community member who died from hypothermia, died from living on the streets because they did not have a house or a home to go back to with these freezing temperatures that we're seeing in Ottawa. And so the overlapping crises of the opioids crisis, mental health, addictions, homelessness, and tying this to understanding the insidious ways that capitalism manifests itself in our communities is also something that we're looking forward to hopefully discussing as well.
This is an awesome organization. I really am happy that you guys are taking on this work, and especially the way that you're going about taking on this work. It seems really holistic and well thought out. Thank you once again for doing this work and taking the time out of your lives and letting us all the way out here know about it. We hope that we can be in touch and learn from each other as we go down the road.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And I might just add
Please.
that the most important thing that I think we can do in these moments of bearing witness to overt genocide is to do things collectively through collective action. And so I think this is just one example of many. But we also want to do it because we want to strengthen the base and to build better understanding and solidarity with other existing communities and organizations, especially within the Palestinian solidarity community. And one such example is that understanding of exploring queer and trans solidarity with Palestine can hopefully strengthen that intersectional solidarity across the existing organizations, so that we have a stronger intersectional movement for liberation for Palestine, but ultimately this is a movement, a social political movement for collective liberation for all peoples. And so when we build that stronger base through collective action, through collective organizing, then we are closer to that world that we all envision, I think.
No, absolutely. I think it's just going to grow. I mean, I think that the model that you guys are working on is definitely replicated in other areas. And once everybody links up nationally, it's going to just be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for your interest and excitement about this project.
Absolutely.
It's really great.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. Thank you. We look forward to catching up with you down the road as we go, as you guys grow, you guys do more work and see where things are at. Thank you so much once again. We really appreciate you guys doing this work and taking the time out. Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks. Stay in touch.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye all. Have a good night. And folks, we're still here 3 hours behind. It's coming up to 20 minutes to 7 o'clock. Stay tuned for more programming coming up next. In the meantime, we will leave you with the first few segments of the Electronic Intifada's breaking news and analysis on day 1 of the Gaza ceasefire. Stay tuned for after 7 for more wonderful community programming.